Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Pope Metallicus, and welcome back to Rock and Roll Religion. We got a hell of a topic for you guys today. One of the formative bands of what would become power metal and the start down the metal journey for one of the members of the Pantheon, Mr. Ronnie James Dio, and the second heavy metal act really for Richie Blackmore, the lead guitarist and just a musical genius in his own right. We are talking the beginnings of Rainbow today. And here to help me do that, as always, we have our laser-guided commie-killing Steel Eagle of Death, the Sentinel. How's it going, my friend?
It's going great, man. I can't wait to talk about it.
Oh, man,
Rainbow is definitely, I'm just re-listening to it, and Rainbow is definitely one of these seminal metal bands. And I'm talking metal. Deep Purple, you could say is hard rock. Rainbow really is metal, because if you apply those songs to today's recording technology, it's heavy metal sounding all the way around.
Hell, dude. And then joining me once again is Christian DeLorme from way back in the day. How's it going, man?
Good, and you, buddy?
Good to have you back. Great to be talking some kick-ass freaking music. I mean, Rainbow is one of those bands that like everybody can dig.
I know, it's a great
They're not
band.
super hard. They're not super niche. They're just kind of a kick-ass rock band that everybody can get behind.
I wish more people knew about them, to be honest. I don't think they're known enough. Everybody knows Sabbath, everybody knows AC/DC, but nobody brings up Rainbow. And without Rainbow, you don't have Dio. Period.
You don't have pretty much any of the new wave of British heavy metal guys.
You don't have that. And you don't have a lot of the European power metal influence bands, because getting against these songs.
Those guys all grew up listening to these guys before.
Those guys all grew up listening, like Halloween, Stradivarius, Gamma Ray,
like Guardian, all of them. Like they all started here.
Yep. And
we're going to get into some of those guys in the near future, because I do want to do like a brief primer on the history of power metal. Being a huge,
I got to be with you for that one too, bro.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. And kind of like I did on the first wave of black metal guys, where we'll go band by band and do some of their early stuff, and really their formation of the genre, because it's another one of those genres that kind of instead of like having like a specific jumping off point, you have like 4 or 5 bands that were all kind of doing the same stuff at the same time and kind of coalesced into what became a new genre and inspired dozens, if not hundreds, of bands going forward.
Right.
And, kicking it off with this first album, Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. And holy shit, what a freaking cool album cover.
Yeah.
Like you just have the freaking, when you talk about power metal freaking album covers, like this is right off the bat, we're already into it. Then you got like the sick castle with the freaking guitar being the top spire. I absolutely dig it.
And it's a Stratocaster spire too, so
absolutely, always got to love it. And you can't. And let's face it, you can't say enough good things about this record. I mean, everything on it slaps.
For me, it's a little bit of a grower, because it's a little slower, a little bit more, kind of, I would say, kind of quiet. There's more quiet moments. Whereas,
yeah, there are a couple slower tracks on it, like Temple of the King and stuff like that.
Self-Portrait, Rainbow, stuff like that. And then you got Man on the Silver Mountain and just bangers.
Which, you talk about a high point. A freaking song so good it became the singer's nickname. And it's just such a groovy song too. Like, it's not the hardest thing ever, but it just has that riff that's just freaking slick as hell, and it just gets in your head immediately.
And if I may add, as a guy who's got 1 foot into classic rock and hard rock and 1 foot into these guys, and thanks to Pope and a few other guys, I'm getting into metal. This would be the perfect introductory album for anybody who wants to dip his toe into metal, who loves music.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, man. This is one of those bands you can pick up for somebody who's like into classic rock or something like that, and be like, you like that? Like, we'll try this.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll like them and Queen, I think, are the 2 bands I usually go to, where it's just like, if you like a lot of classic rock stuff, listen to these guys. It'll kind of lead you down that path. And you can tell like these guys were who a lot of people were listening to in the late 70s, early 80s. Because they all started taking stuff from it. From this album, and even bands like Priest were starting to, like, you can hear a lot of sounds from this on Sad Wings of Destiny. Going into like Dreamer Deceiver and stuff like that, and some of the slower and more melodic side of Judas Priest you can hear from Rainbow.
Yeah, okay. Now I hear now I know what you're talking about. Like, to be honest, I hadn't given
the next
this
one becomes more obvious.
Yeah, to be honest, I hadn't given this one as much of a listen as I had the two follow-ups, but I could hear what you're talking about, especially like songs like what's the one off of Sad Wings? Victim of Changes.
Victim of Changes, you can hear a little bit of that, and especially like songs like Temple of the King, with that little bit slow acoustic intro into that bluesy riff like that. You can hear that in here. Although there's some other stuff on the later albums that you can kind of hear more of that metal sound developing. And here, like, they do have some heavy tracks on this one too, like 16th Century Green Sleeves and stuff like that, where like it's just really hard and heavy, and you can tell that was the direction they were trying to go. And with a singer like Ronnie James Dio, you can sell just about anything.
That's true.
And
the man just has a vocal performance that's just unmatched.
And it's not just the vocals, and I know the vocals are huge, but Ronnie is a great songwriter too, and so is Blackmore. So you put those two together, and it's just magic.
Yeah, when you consider the two of them, plus Jimmy Bain on the bass and Tony Carey on keyboards, which was a new thing coming in that kind of developed, or this sound is kind of where this band kind of brought to the mainstream with that synthesizer sound. And then, of course, the amazing Cozy Powell on drums. Like, you have a hell of a lineup for a band. And, oh, man. Like,
I don't think Cozy played drums on this album.
He is on the next two. I believe he's on this.
He's on the next two, but on this first album, I don't think he is. Because I know Cozy. I can recognize Cozy Powell pretty distinctly.
Yeah, I know he's on the next two. I thought he was on this one as well. I may be wrong on that.
Let me double check, because my ears, I swear it.
And while we do that, let's check the chat, see who's here. Union of Amateur Strategists, always good to see you, dude. Glad to see you here. Fish Chozo, as always, good to see you, man. And then Soul Assassin, yep, another week, another band to get into. This is what I do to you people, and this is why we do the show.
Jerry Driscoll played drums on this album.
Okay, so they got Cozy on the next one, which actually makes sense, because I was going to say the drumming on this one isn't as standout as on the next two, and now I know why. I figured it was just kind of Cozy just kind of getting to terms with the new band and stuff like that. Sometimes that happens, but oh man, like this. But this lineup is just, when a band can come out of nowhere, and I mean, obviously you have a couple of experienced guys. Ronnie was around with Elf, and then was a doo-wop singer in the 50s, so he was already fairly experienced. And then of course you have Richie Blackmore coming fresh out of Deep Purple. So you have that side of it as well, where you have two experienced guys that can really put together an album. But most bands, their first output doesn't sound anywhere near this good. I mean, I would say that even legendary bands like Judas Priest are no exception, where they didn't really hit their stride until their second, third record. And then these guys come screaming out of the ether, rocking and rolling just like they meant to. And it's such a versatile record too. I mean, if you got guys who are more into like the classic rock sound, point them towards, if you don't like rock and roll, if you got guys who are into the more melodic or folk rock type stuff, Temple of the King's right over there, or Self-Portrait and stuff like that. Like, it's all on here. Like, everything Rainbow would absolutely slay at going forward, it's all on this record. So I would say that this is the perfect introduction to not only this band, but heavy metal as a genre for somebody who's never listened to it before. Because it has all the elements there, and yet it's, I don't want to say like commercial enough, because it's not really a commercial record.
I would say it's not overwhelming. It wouldn't overwhelm
Yeah,
a
it's not
first-time
overpowering.
listener. It's not overpowering.
It's a good album to dip your beak into before you really jump in with both
Yeah,
feet.
and then hand them like the British Steel, and then the Kill 'Em Alls, and then
maybe a little Welcome to Hell by Venom.
maybe a little Welcome to Hell.
If you really wanted to walk on the dark side.
Maybe Death's first album, stuff like that.
Yep. We'll get into death metal at some point, because it's a genre I've been meaning to look more into. It's not something I reach for every now all that often.
No, neither do I. The only death metal band I consistently listen to and have all the albums of that I love is Death. I love Death.
Death I'll have to get into. Children of Bodom, I've listened to a bunch of their stuff, because I used to work with a guy who was a big fan of them.
I'm a big fan of Bodom, so I'd love to talk Bodom.
Oh yeah, we'll do that at some point, because that's a band that needs some attention too. Because Alexi Lyle is a brilliant guitar player, and some of the stuff that they do, and again, kind of tying it back to these guys. I mean, they have that kind of neoclassical style that Rainbow is just lightning focused on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you hear a lot of stuff coming out of Richie Blackmore in general, but Rainbow particularly, that would not sound out of place coming out of the 1800s. They're just doing it with an electric guitar and a synthesizer now, rather than an entire.
Yeah, exactly. I was rewatching that. Oh, good. Sorry. Go ahead, Christian.
No, I don't think you said anything.
Oh,
okay.
Let me just quickly finish. I was rewatching this documentary on Richie Blackmore. It's available on YouTube, and I suggest you watch it. It's a great documentary.
Yeah, I've seen that. That one's pretty good.
He adores the Middle Ages for multiple reasons. He likes the fact that people were more connected to the spiritual side of the world, because there wasn't a lot of technology. There wasn't a lot of it was more folkish, more folk. So he really connects with the guitar players and the musicians from those days, and
there's a lot that in the lyrical content in a lot of Rainbow stuff that kind of highlights that of being more connected with the world and our place in it, rather than ultra high tech and stuff like that, is getting back to that root of connecting with the natural and the supernatural in some ways.
Yes.
And that's something I've really dug about Rainbow, and it goes on to have a place in Dio and his stuff with Black Sabbath as well. Because Sabbath got a lot more power metal during the Dio era, and I'm sad you weren't part of that stream, Sentinel, because we did a show on Dio era Sabbath on 70s Rock Fans channel, and damn, what a band!
Yeah,
they didn't last too long, but man, did they make an impact. I mean, you have songs like Heaven and Hell, Neon Nights, freaking The Mob Rules, Sign of the Southern Cross, Children of the Sea,
Die Young.
Like, it's just nonstop cacophony of kick-ass. And speaking of cacophony of kick-ass, we have probably Rainbow's finest album here in Rainbow Rising.
For me,
everything on the record's fucking awesome.
For me, this and the next one, but if you really want to blow your fucking mind with an album, give somebody Rainbow Rising.
This is one of those albums that will just expand your musical awareness to a level you had never thought of before. Because this is one of those albums that will rightfully go down in history as one of the greatest of all time. And yeah, Soul Assassin, I heard about that. Ozzy officially retired. He can't do it anymore, which I think we all knew was coming. He hadn't done a full tour in a couple of years. what was it, 2019 was his last full tour.
Something like that.
So I think we all knew that was coming, but it does suck to see him go. I mean, regardless of the quality of the show in recent years, it is the end of an era, seeing the Prince of Darkness himself retire from the road.
Yeah.
And I think they were supposed to tour with Priest, so that'll be interesting
Yeah.
to see what they do going forward. I think they're talking about another album
Already?
Yeah, I think Priest is talking about doing another record.
Priest's new record is probably going to come down the pipeline late 2023, early 2024. I'm almost sure of it. They're just kind of keeping it under wraps.
We're both looking forward to that.
Yeah. Well, I think they're keeping it under wraps because they're really trying to sell the 50th heavy metal kind of anniversary thing and kind of keep that sort of focused.
Yeah.
Kind of milk that shit.
Which it's funny talking about 50 heavy metal years when they're on their 52nd anniversary.
Yeah, I know.
But some things that we can't talk about on YouTube got in the way.
Yeah.
Which sucked because I had tickets to see them, Sabaton opening for them in October of 2020. And then that never happened. And then I had tickets to see them again in 2021, and that show ended up getting canceled too. So I was just like, "Oh, come on! You're two of my favorite bands. Come here." But getting back to this one and albums that inspire a generation of artists like me. Let's face it. How many power metal bands do you think can be directly linked to Stargazer by itself?
Manowar, Halloween. Stradivarius, Sonata Arctica.
Probably Blind Guardian too.
Blind Guardian.
Just a whole list of bands that would not exist without this record.
Who else? Angra.
Yep.
Anthem from Japan.
Yeah, we're going to have to get into some of the Japanese bands at some point because those guys kick ass.
Yeah. Fuck. Absolutely Primal Fear. Gamma Ray. Pretty much any German power metal band.
Yeah, pretty much any German metal band from 1985 to current.
It's like, imagine being a kid and go in 80s Germany. Probably going to school and your fucking teacher is probably wearing a Rainbow Rising shirt while he's teaching. Yeah.
And especially coming out of even in North America, being in high school and listening to stuff like this. This is that's the stuff we don't get because we're not old enough to remember that.
And this was 76.
Yeah, that's the thing is how early these guys were. In the 80s, this would have been fairly standard fare, but these guys were doing it in 75, 76.
And it sounds so heavy too.
And the production quality for the time was absolutely outstanding.
That's what I absolutely love about this album and the next album that was kind of preventing me from really fully embracing the first album, because for me it helps when the engineering and the producer could get as much of the live sound of the song into the recording, and when they got Cozy Powell, and who's also a songwriter, by the way, it really helped really just create this synergy between Dio, Richie, and Cozy.
Oh, there you go, Sentinel.
There you go. There you go. And I was just making an assumption.
Yeah. And it must have been really interesting for a lot of the East German kids in 89 to 91, discovering all these bands for the first time because they weren't allowed to listen to it before that.
Right.
So you have the Wall going up in 61, when rock and roll was in its infancy. And you come back and then you weren't allowed to buy records or listen to any of it for damn near 30 years because damn near 30 years because communism and all that, which is another reason communism is for gays. And then you come out in 1989 and you start hearing all of this stuff that's been going on in the meantime, and you're like, holy shit, I was missing out on all this.
I was thinking about this the other day, and imagine having this perception of the world be completely shaped by the government, and then it's finally lifted, and you kind of see the world, as it really exists. It just must have been just a sense of bitterness and anger, and also just because of that, they hid so much of it away from you. You know what I mean?
And also just wonder and amazement at all the cool shit that had been going on in the world, and you had no idea.
That exactly, that too.
And even outside of music, like, these guys had never seen Star Trek before.
Yeah.
They had never seen Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like, just wow. Like this is what you guys were up to in the meantime? Uh-huh. That's why we wanted you to join us. Shit. And it must have just been such an interesting time to be over there. And especially like, the late 80s, there was so much good stuff coming out all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like from TV to music to movies to, the beginnings of video games. All that shit was just a whole new world of possibilities for people to explore that were never allowed to before. And that's what gave rise to bands like Rammstein.
Mm-hmm.
Was they came coming out of East Germany. I think they could already play, but they were playing mostly, folk music and stuff like that. And then they heard heavy metal for the first time and immediately fell in love. And I mean, bands like this play a part in that. And once again, you have like, even just the album art is just one of those like, it doesn't really tell you what. Yeah, it's just awe-inspiring. It's just like, ooh, what's that? Let's give that a shot.
And one thing I noticed is that the album is heavy, progressive, but the songwriting is so freaking catchy and accessible. The first track, Starstruck, it just begins. Dun, da, 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 dun, da, da, da,
Oh yeah.
dun,
The riffs and lyrics in this are just instantly freaking infectious.
The lady starstruck.
And it just has that late 70s swagger to it as well.
Yeah.
Like, all the songs from this era had it, and it was just beautiful. It's just something in the way music was written back then. It just speaks to me on a very, very cool level. And then, in the middle there, you also have, some absolute bangers on this record as well.
Yep.
I mean, it's another one that kind of has everything that Rainbow does well.
Run with the Wolf.
Run with the
Wolf.
Wolf.
Light in the Black, which is fucking
Light in the Black is borderline speed metal.
Yeah.
Which was interesting to hear coming out of 76. I was just like, well, now we know where Sin After Sin by Priest came from.
And I was just about to say that. And of course, I wish we could, but we might get hit with a copyright strike. But you guys, if you're out there and listening, quickly just type in Rainbow Stargazer and just listen to the opening. Just listen to that opening drum intro by Cozy Powell, one of the all-time great drum intros to a song of any fucking song in heavy metal or rock and roll ever. It's up there with Hot for Teacher. It's up there with Painkiller. It's up there with pretty much, all of them. It's an incredible
And
one.
I think that was the first song I ever really heard by Rainbow.
That was your first Rainbow song?
Yeah.
Holy shit. You must have been fucking blown away.
I was just like, who the fuck are these guys? And then I heard Ronnie James Dio's voice. I'm like, what? There was more Dio I didn't know about. Come here. I need to know everything about this band immediately.
Yeah, any kind of song that catches you. The first, for me, it was Gates of Babylon that really drew me in. But we'll get to that one.
Yeah, we'll get to that on the next record. There's a whole bunch of them on that record that are all-time classics as well.
I had heard Gates of Babylon through a cover that Yngwie Malmsteen did, because he did a bunch of covers. It was a tribute album. he did Gates of Babylon, which listen to that cover. It's an excellent
there's
cover
also
too.
a long-standing habit of Yngwie Malmsteen stealing former Rainbow singers.
Check my Twitter. I said that yesterday.
I think he's performed with every one of them.
Yes, he's hired every single one of them for records. Every single one,
except with the exception of Ronnie James Dio. I think he only did a collab with him.
Yeah, Dream On,
Then,
and that's the
Graham
superior
Bonnet
version
with
of Dream On, by the way.
Graham Bonnet he did with Alcatraz.
Yes.
Jolyn Turner and a couple of other ones he did with Yngwie Malmsteen and
Doogie White. He even hired Doogie White for.
That's right. Yeah, he hired Doogie White later on. It's like he's hit every single one of them.
He loves him some Richie Blackmore sloppy seconds, man.
Yeah, and you know what? There's something to be said for that because almost every singer Rainbow's ever hired has been brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. I think Yngwie is a huge Blackmore fan, but he is so good at not being a Blackmore clone. I mean, he is totally Yngwie Malmsteen. His playing sounds nothing like.
Oh yeah, he's always been brilliant at taking
influence
by other people and then making it into his own thing.
Exactly. The two things that they share a love of is just the Stratocaster and those singers, basically.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, and let's face it, Yngwie's Stratocaster is just fucking sick. That canary yellow Stratocaster.
That canary, and people don't know this.
That's a custom color. That's not something.
I'm not even
a color the Strat ever came in.
I'm not even bringing that up. It's got a scallop fretboard.
I was about to say that.
And
that's
if you're
really
a guitar player,
like
you know what a scallop fretboard is. You know how much harder it is to play fast and accurate with a scallop fretboard.
Well, it's actually easier.
How's it easier?
Because you can feel it rather than trying to count the frets. You can feel it with your fingers.
Oh, okay.
So you can kind of go up and down the fretboard a lot easier. Actually, hang on 1 second. I can show you guys what we're talking about here.
Cool.
All right, so we'll have my Stratocaster clone on here, my Ibanez RG270, and if I can get it close enough to the camera, basically what we're talking about with the scallop fretboard is these edges of all these little metal bands are your frets, and in between them is actually dug out. On mine, they're flat. On Yngwie's guitar, these are actually divoted out.
They're scooped.
So that you can just feel the edges right where the frets are. So you can kind of go up and down and feel exactly what fret you're supposed to be on when you're there. So it actually does make it a lot easier to play fast and accurately when you have that.
That's weird because I would think because it allows you to bend the string further into the fretboard because of the additional space.
It allows that as well. So it has multiple different advantages, and it's obviously a lot more expensive because that's a lot more machine time.
Yeah, I just always thought as a guitar player it would be more difficult.
I thought so too, and then I played one with a scallop fretboard, and it's like, oh wow, this is actually a lot easier because I can feel what I'm doing rather than having to look at it.
Okay, cool.
So that was an interesting innovation that he created that went on to be on a couple of other guitars as well. Because let's face it, if Yngwie does it, it must be a good idea, right?
Hey, Yngwie is the only one who does it. You know who else has scallop fretboard?
I don't off the top of my head. I know some players get them put on their guitars or do it
Downing.
Really? I didn't know he did.
Yeah, he loves the whammy bar. So any kind of guitar where he can bend the string as much as possible, he's gonna incorporate it into stuff. Now he doesn't always use scallop fretboards, but I've seen him in some of his stuff. So he definitely
I know a lot of guitarists have them custom put onto their necks because it's really, really nice. I know Richie Faulkner doesn't because I have his sitting right back there.
Oh, he has a scallop fretboard too?
No, he doesn't. He actually has a very interesting fretboard in the fact that, like, how they usually finish the back of the necks here, with a nice lacquer. Richie's is not like that at all because he wears a ton of rings when he plays.
Oh, so it's all just
Yeah, so he just said just spray bomb the back of the neck black with like a satin finish because I'm gonna sand most of that finish off anyway, just by playing it. So he just that makes it easier for his guitar techs because they can just spray bomb it again when it looks a little beat up,
Yeah.
and can kind of just sand it out and spray bomb it with black spray paint. It'll be good. Which anything to make your guitar tech's life easier is a benefit. Because God, those guys put in work.
Any kind of roadie puts in, or tech, any kind of guy who sets up stuff like that.
Those guys are the real magicians behind the scenes of any successful band. Is keeping the gear running, keeping everything set up correctly.
Yeah,
shout out to all good to go.
Shout out to Nickel McBrain's fucking drum tech.
Yeah. Or God help him, Neil Peart's.
Yes.
Because could you imagine setting up that freaking rig?
Oh my God.
I would lose my mind.
And everything has to be in the perfectly same place every single time.
Mm-hmm.
Built up and then built down. Built up, built down, night after night.
And just and then tuning and making sure the mics are all set for all those drums all the way around his setup.
All the heads, all the and then the electrics too, because he uses like electronic pads and some of
that's right, yeah. Too. And that's another band that probably took some inspiration from Rainbow on their later material, being Rush.
Yeah.
Who we'll get to very, very soon. Maybe not next week, but I think maybe the week after we'll get into some early Rush.
Okay.
Because they're another one that was just a formative band in this genre, and also has a lot of like the sword and sorcery kind of leanings towards their lyrical content mainly. But you could tell that they took some inspiration from Rainbow in their own way.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether it be the synths, which Rush was always a heavy user of, going into like some of the more sci-fi and fantasy leanings in terms of
that's what
content.
I would say where the connection for me, at least, where I can think of when I hear Tom Sawyer, I can instantly think of, okay, yeah, I can hear this self-identifying mythic kind of connection,
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I mean, again, like these bands, or this band particularly, just influenced everybody. And when a band influences not only the bands that come after them, but their peers, that's when you're dealing with a real legend.
Right.
And you saw that in the late 60s, early 70s with bands like Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath in a lot of ways, all kind of coming in and cross-pollinating into what would become heavy metal. And even bands that aren't specifically metal, like Led Zeppelin, like later on towards like Physical Graffiti, you can hear a lot of Black Sabbath and a little bit of these guys in there.
Yeah, that big what's the song? Kashmir,
and to a larger extent, some of Achilles' Last Stand as well.
Yes, that too.
Which just you can hear that kind of, which is funny considering that they were an influence on these bands coming in.
Yeah,
and then they're then influencing them in return. So it was really cool. It's a really cool era of music history.
Yeah, every cross-pollinating, everything kind of intermingling with one another and building. Just remember when things used to integrate and kind of and then things would like be built up and positive stuff would come out of them instead of things kind of just integrating and then everything being torn down. Now with all the socialism and the devicism and identity kind of politics,
and also a lot of the infighting and stuff like that in scenes and stuff like that. Like, this guy stole this from me, and then whatever.
Right.
Like, none of it used to matter. Where they were just kind of doing their own thing and like taking something you did and then putting their own spin on it, and it was cool.
Ozzy said it bluntly and best in the Decline of Western Civilization Part 2 documentary. He said, "We're all fucking thieves. We're all thieves." And what he meant by that was
and that's
we
coming
all
from a
took
guy
each other's
who's in a
ideas.
band with Geezer Butler, everybody has ripped a bass riff off of.
Exactly.
It's like, if you are in a metal band, you have played a Geezer Butler bass riff at some point. It does not matter who you are. Richie's done it. Like, it's just one of those things where, like, they were so formative to the sound in its entirety that, like, you can't help but be influenced by them and, you know, rip off a little bit of it here and there.
Speaking of bass players, can we give flowers to Roger Glover? He
Yeah,
never gets brought up in one of the great bass dates, and I think he
and
deserves.
he really does deserve it.
He does. He's contributed a lot to the songwriting in multiple eras of both Deep Purple and Rainbow.
Yep.
And he's just a great also producer too.
He is, and didn't he actually produce "Sin After Sin" by Judas Priest as well?
Let me double check,
Because I think I remember that. It was either "Sad Wings of Destiny" or
Roger Glover. Yep.
Sin. Okay. So yeah, I mean, that would explain where a lot of the musical influence come in. Because I think Glover was with Deep Purple at the time.
So Sin After Sin is 77. So Glover is with Priest Purple at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, because he came in with Graham Bonnet, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. I always get that shit mixed up because all these English musicians have played with each other in one band or one album.
I mean, they were all connected. Like, this guy knew that one, and, you know, who had played in a band with this other guy over here. It was really cool because you'd have this constant, you know, revolving
community of, like, it was just like this community of, like, English rock musicians
who were all just bouncing ideas off each other constantly and playing with each other and jamming and then touring together and stuff like that.
And they never beefed with each other. Do you notice that? There's not one, like, bullshit behind the scenes kind of drama between, you know, those guys being jealous of, you know, this or that. And it's just,
I mean, there does start up with that shit later. You know, after a lot of it went sour and they played with each other for a while, and then, you know, this one clashed with that one person personally, which Richie Blackmore is certainly guilty of.
Yeah.
But what came out of that period musically is just unparalleled in the history of mankind, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
Like, you have, like, the classic period of so many different bands, from, you know, Sabbath to Priest to Rainbow to Rush. And it wasn't even just, you know, centered around England either.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have a bunch of American bands like Kansas and all that coming out with some of their kick-ass material. You have the Scorpions in Germany. You have all of these other bands who are all playing around with this stuff at the same time, and it's just all good. UFO was around right at the same time.
Right.
And leading into, you know, with artists we've covered fairly recently, Michael Schenker, another absolutely genius musician who was difficult to work with. It's funny. It's almost like that's a pattern. And going forward into, you know, the 80s with guys like Yngwie Malmsteen and Eddie Van Halen, where, you know, brilliant musicians, not the easiest guys to get along with. Which, especially Yngwie, that man ran through singers faster than anybody I've ever seen.
Yeah.
He's like, oh yeah, that was good. I'm done with you now. Go away.
And the other thing I noticed was, if you listen to any kind of live Yngwie album or anything, his amps are always overpowering the vocalist. The only time this didn't happen was when I saw Yngwie for the first and only time live, and that was when he was touring with Ripper Owens in 2011. And Ripper Owens has such a strong voice; he's able to cut through that fucking super stacks of Marshalls that Yngwie has. By the way, one of the best concerts I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, I've heard Yngwie can be a little inconsistent. Like, it's either amazing or it can be really bad, depending on the night and depending on, you know, the acoustics of the arena.
Oh, and this was at the San Francisco Fillmore, in 2011.
Oh,
It had
yeah. Fillmore,
great
yeah.
acoustics anyways. It sounded amazing. Best version of Heaven Tonight I've ever heard by Ripper.
Dude, that would be sick hearing Ripper Owens sing Heaven Tonight. Like, that's one of the classic Yngwie
There
tunes.
is there's a look through YouTube. There's type in Heaven Tonight, Yngwie Malmsteen live San Francisco Heaven Tonight, and I think you'll see like old grainy like 2011 video footage of it, and it still sounds amazing.
Speaking of which, like that was another aspect to Rainbow that I don't think people really understand is seeing Ronnie James Dio live.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of singers that can do kind of what Ronnie does on their albums, but this man's stage presence and his power, even live, is just unbelievable. And he can do it without and make it sound pretty unique from the studio version.
Mm-hmm. Which is one of the criticisms I have about Ronnie James Dio, in my opinion. I prefer when it sounds closer to the studio version with some improvisation. When it gets a little too when Halford does it, he does it in a way that makes it sound really fucking cool. But for me, when Dio does it, it doesn't really fit as well. It doesn't hit as well, at least for me.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think it depends on what he's doing that particular performance, because that doesn't mean, I mean, every night's different. So
yeah, exactly.
You never know what you're gonna get, and you could get fairly close to the studio version. Ronnie could want to go a different direction with it that night. And to me, that's part of the interesting part about seeing a band live is you don't know what you're going to get. And you could hear something very, very different and way better than what they did on the album. Or it could be, just not something you really liked as much.
Absolutely. And the live show or record, if we go into a live record, I'll give you an example. I love the songs off of the first Halford solo album. I can't stand.
Resurrection's a fucking amazing album.
It's an amazing album, but live Insurrection, when those songs are played live, those versions of those songs, way better. I'll listen to those songs over re-listening to Resurrection anytime, because what Halford does and the live sound of it is amazing. Check out Live Insurrection, Halford Live Insurrection.
Nobody talks about it. That show, and yeah, you're right. That show was absolutely off the chain.
Nobody talks about it because it's like one of the more obscure like live album performances, but it's honestly check it out because he includes versions of Priest's songs in that set list that he does. That holy shit is amazing.
Yeah. And they both have. I mean, Rob Halford has his own place in the heavy metal pantheon, probably right at the apex.
That I would say that live show is Rob Halford, height of his powers, fully re-embracing his identity as the metal god.
Yeah, and that was shortly before he rejoined Priest.
Yep.
Which sometimes you just need to get that little side project out of your system and just kind of do your own thing for a while, and then you can come back and focus on the band again.
Mm-hmm.
And in Halford's case, he created another kick-ass band.
Yeah.
And showed that it wasn't just Priest. It was his influence that was also a big part of their sound and their success. And in Dio's case, I mean, when he left Rainbow, he went immediately to Black Sabbath in 79 and then created some of the greatest music that there's ever been on this planet, coming right out the gate with Heaven and Hell. And that's a difficult thing to do, is coming into a band that's already established and replacing their lead singer.
And making that
part of the sound of your band that completely changed.
Agree or disagree? Black Sabbath, Heaven and Hell is a comeback album.
Oh, it's a comeback album, to be sure, but it's a comeback album that absolutely soars.
Exactly. And that was the biggest gamble because he replaced Ozzy. So there
Yeah,
was,
and you'll hear fans to this day go, "Oh, well, I only like Ozzy era Sabbath." It's like, then you're missing out, man. Because Ronnie James Dio has some absolutely killer material with these guys. Tony Martin as well.
mhm.
I mean, hell, like songs like "The Shining" are still in my all-time Black Sabbath uh, playlist that I absolutely adore to this day. And to me, Tony sounds a lot more like Ronnie James Dio than he does Ozzy.
Absolutely.
So I would say that Ronnie set the tone for Black Sabbath coming out of the '70s and going forward.
Mhm.
And then they reunited with him for Dehumanizer later on.
That's a good album too. There's
It's an
some
underrated one, I think,
I think it's underrated personally.
because it was the '90s. It was metal. Nobody heard it because
And it
we
was also
discuss this
Ronnie
all the time.
it was also Ronnie trying to apply his style of songwriting and lyrical kind of content to an era that no longer really embraced the sword and sorcery and fantasy. It was more sort of uh, down to earth and realistic, and what was really popular then.
And
Well,
a lot more dark and doomy than his usual lyrics, which are usually very hopeful and very uplifting. And
mhm.
um, Dehumanizer is one of those albums that's kind of depressing and dystopian in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's
And
cool
it's a
too.
very different look for Ronnie,
Very different.
but not undeserved given given the late '90s and early 2000s.
Did you cover that Dehumanizer album when you talked about Dio era Sabbath?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
So we went through all of it, and that album was underrated, I believe. Hey,
It really
Courtney,
was. What's up,
how's it
Courtney?
going? And this is an interesting question. Who would I put on the Mount Rushmore of metal? I'd say certainly all four of those guys deserve to be on there.
Yeah,
Um,
I think you nailed it.
I think you'd need a different Mount Rushmore for every instrument because there's
Yes.
so many guys that are just integral to the genre. In terms of other singers, who would I put up there? Probably Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden
Dickinson, he could be on the bench.
would definitely be in discussion. Um, I would
Who
put
else?
Michael Kiske from Halloween on there.
Eric Adams from Manowar.
Yeah, Eric Adams definitely belongs in that conversation. Ralph Sheepers from Primal Fear.
Rolf Sheepers.
Ripper Owens.
Ripper.
Just given the sheer number of bands that he's been part of that have been kick ass.
Yeah.
And he's one of those artists that like everyone's like, oh, well, he was the second singer for Judas Priest. Like, yeah, and he made that band his own. It was just unfortunate that the band wasn't doing a lot of great material at that point because it was the '90s and metal. It was kind of becalmed in the sea of music.
Right.
Dave Mustaine's another interesting one. Joaquin Broden later on, I would say, from Sabaton is certainly a different kind of vocal style.
I want to give Hetfield his props. I think Hetfield deserves to be in that metal vocal category because his approach was so just
Raw and stripped down.
Raw, stripped down, and just unorthodox. He was not a traditional singer, but most blues singers back in the 40s weren't traditional singers.
True.
They were just singing from their heart, and that's really what
Joaquin's another one that has a very interesting vocal style, and that you don't hear very many heavy metal baritones.
Yeah.
That stay in that range. Like you have guys who are natural baritones, like Jeff Tate from Queensryche, that then train that super high end of their voice. But you don't have that many guys who will just stay down in that range and deliver it, especially with the power and emotion that Joaquin can.
Matt Barlow.
So I would put him in that conversation as well.
Matt Barlow, definitely.
Matt Barlow is another one. So there's some there. I mean, we'd be here forever listing off artists because like there's so many that could be up there.
Yeah.
But if I had to say, like, Mount Rushmore, I think you nailed it. Ozzy has to be up there just because, let's face it, Ozzy era Sabbath started this party.
Yeah, and let's not pretend that Ozzy isn't a great singer, because
He is. He's not vocally very complex, but he is a very talented singer in his own right. Not a great songwriter, because he doesn't do that. He sings. That's what he does. And I'm much more inclined to, give him that based on the fact that he knows he doesn't, have the songwriting chops and doesn't try. He stays in his lane and he does what he does. And
he contributes some creative ideas, and but his bread and butter is the frontman personality, the image, the identity, the countenance of what he's presenting, the Blizzard of Oz kind of images, the Diary of the Madman, the Bark at the Moon. That kind of he's his own icon. He is his own sort of presentation. He's Vincent Price, basically.
Yeah. And there's something to be said for that. And then Lemmy, obviously, like, without that one man, half of rock and roll wouldn't exist today.
Yeah.
So, like, you can't deny him on any level. I would also put him up there for bass players.
We could do baseball. We could do a Mount Rushmore of bass players who sing, a Mount Rushmore of guitar players who sing. You know what I mean?
And like, we wouldn't be, and
it makes this list
we'd have to put a duo up there at the same time, like, especially for guitar players with like Adrian Smith and Dave Murray, or Glenn Tipton and KK Downing.
Yeah,
Richie Blackmore would probably be up on mine.
As far as like the dual guitar players?
Well, as far as just guitar players in general, Richie Blackmore and Yngwie would both be up there.
And Richie and Yngwie are both excellent songwriters alone. They didn't need to join. Those two didn't need to join any popular band before and after to prove how good they are as songwriters.
And usually the exit of both of those men from whatever band they're in tends to be the exit of that band from relevance.
Notice how he left the Lauren Harris band, and Lauren Harris never released another album.
Yep. Or Alcatraz with Yngwie leaving.
Steve Vai actually came into Alcatraz.
Well,
Steve Vai was discovered by Graham Bonnet.
That's true, yeah. Where he came in and performed pretty well with Alcatraz, but let's face it, it was never really the same after Yngwie.
No, it wasn't. I agree with you. That's a fair assessment. It wasn't the same. It lost momentum.
Yeah, and especially once Graham Bonnet left, it was just like that band was pretty much done.
See, what happened was Steve came in, released, and this is actually Steve Vai's favorite album that he's ever done, was the album he did with Graham Bonnet and Alcatraz. But then immediately after, he got the gig in David Lee Roth Band.
Yep.
And then, yeah, everything.
Which talk about two singers that lucked out with brilliant guitarists their entire career. Graham Bonnet and David Lee Roth.
Again, Richie Blackmore pulls Graham Bonnet from another genre, by the way, because he wasn't a rock and roller at all. He was more doo-wop and, pop.
Which is another doo-wop singer to replace Ronnie James Dio.
It's just
and you can hear it in a lot of their songs, like Since You've Been Gone and stuff like that, which are classic Rainbow songs to this day for a reason.
Yeah.
Which we'll probably get to at some point. But getting back to this era of Rainbow, then you have the last output by this band with Ronnie at the head in 1978 with Long Live Rock and Roll. And holy shit, what a record.
Yeah.
Like, you have so many classic tracks on here. Like my personal Rainbow favorite of all time, Kill the King.
That's a great song.
You have freaking Gates of Babylon on this one.
That's my absolute favorite song on this record. It's just, again, it's up there with Stargazer, and it's an epic. But I would say Long Live Rock and Roll is rising, but I think maybe a little bit more focused, more tightly
little more
paced.
focused on straight ahead rock and roll tunes rather
Straight
than,
ahead rock and roll, less kind of build up and leads and
and less like lessened on the sword and sorcery aspect of it,
a little bit of that too.
which would cause tension between Richie and Ronnie, where this is ultimately what led to Ronnie's split with the band.
Yeah.
With Ronnie wanting to stay with that more mystical sword and sorcery style of songwriting and lyricism, and Richie kind of wanted to go more towards the mainstream commercial side, which
Hmm.
is what you hear out of later Rainbow.
Yeah. And it's not like that. Any of those songs are bad because if you listen to those songs, they're
They're
great
still absolutely
songs.
kick ass. They're
They're
just a
absolutely
little more
kick-ass.
commercial and poppy
They're
than
just a little more commercial and poppy.
Rainbow than Ronnie would do with Black Sabbath and going forward into Dio. And when you want to talk about some of the guitar players that Ronnie James Dio has worked with,
Yeah, I know, right?
I mean, you have the Grandmaster himself, Tony Iommi,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have freaking Vivian Campbell
Oh my God.
coming in for his work with the first couple of Dio records, which you want to talk about two absolute classic freaking albums by an artist to start their career. Holy
I know,
Diver
right?
and Last in Line. Like from like 1975 to 1988 or so, Ronnie James Dio could do no wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much every album he was on turned into solid gold.
I need to get Dream Evil because I haven't given that a full listen, at least
That one
in
was
a long
another
time.
just was another brilliant record by him, and like you could tell, like it
And
was
that's
just very
without Vivian Campbell. So I really need to give it a re-listen
yeah.
and reappraise it because I've heard some obscure tracks on
And there's some
YouTube
stuff on
from it.
Dream Evil that would not sound out of place from this era of Rainbow.
Exactly.
Even Last in Line, I think, would do pretty well on this one. And
Yeah.
and one of the criticisms I've heard of Ronnie, and it is a criticism, but also it's a criticism in the way I don't mind, in that Ronnie turns basically every band he's into this era of Rainbow. And I don't mind that. this era of Rainbow kicks ass.
That's who he is.
And I think you would have seen them get heavier and more power metal as it goes on. Like I could totally see the Richie Blackmore era of Rainbow evolving into Holy Diver
Hmm.
with
Imagine
maybe
the Richard
with maybe
Blackmore.
some stops with like Children of the Sea and Sign of the Southern Cross on the way and a little more heavy side.
Imagine if this lineup remained the same. Richie didn't want to go more commercial and wanted to stick to that. Cozy Powell's still buying the kit, so you got this incredible heavy drumming, and they start making albums heavier and heavier into the mid to late 80s. Talk about potentially some of the heaviest power metal imaginable.
Like that could I mean, instead of what we got with the formation of power metal, with it being like 4 or 5 bands that all kind of had that sword and sorcery mindset that these guys pioneered, coming in and kind of coalescing into a genre, you could have had Rainbow as a spearhead of just an entire new wave of music,
Exactly.
which would have been absolutely insane, especially given the creative talent that these guys showed off just on these 3 albums.
I know.
Like just getting into that level of performance and that level of songwriting that just absolutely changes music forever. And they did that already on these 3. And with this album, it seemed like they were just hitting their stride.
Yeah.
Like they could have kept going with albums like this into perpetuity. And it seems like that wasn't something Richie really wanted to do, which is too bad because he's really fucking good at it.
Yeah, I know.
And unfortunately, I think like his weaker stuff is when he goes commercial. because you don't get a lot of like, the really insane riffs. You don't get a lot of the really complicated solos and stuff like that. That Richie Black is one of the reasons everybody worships Richie Blackmore.
That's true. You
And
don't. You
unfortunately,
get more straight ahead, kind of just rock stuff, and
which
the
there's nothing wrong
compositions
with, and
aren't
it's
as heavy.
still insanely high quality when he does it, but it's not my favorite stuff from him.
Mhm. Yeah, I can listen up to Rainbow. I can listen to select tracks off of the Sweet Dreams or Pleasure to Dreams. The one with the song the album with the song Street of Dreams on it with Joel Turner. I can only listen to like select tracks off off those albums because it just kept on getting more commercial and super commercial at that point.
Yeah.
Almost like pop to an
Yeah.
extent.
I gotta go for 1 second, so just vamp for me real quick.
Sure. The first time I heard the song Long Live Rock and Roll was actually from the movie Rockstar, which is something I think we should talk about on a Rock and Roll Religion, or just check out the movie Rockstar with Mark Wahlberg. He obviously isn't great in it. But everything else around him in it is fucking awesome. And though I hated the statement it was making on hair metal at the time as this kind of like kind of like this kind of goofy image, flash in the pan kind of genre of metal. Rockstar, at least did for me, was introduce me to a bunch of bands that I had no idea existed, and also stirred something up in me in 2001 that I had been craving and I didn't know I wanted, which was traditional classic heavy metal. I was so sick of listening to Limp Bizkit and Korn and new metal. I craved that old school heavy metal style.
Yeah, that's kind of where I came in as well. Like, because I grew up in the same era where all we knew about in terms of heavy music was like Metallica, freaking maybe some Megadeth in my case. Obviously like Rammstein, Korn, Slipknot, all the bands we grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just looking for something different, and then along comes, in my case, Strange New Worlds or Brave New World by Iron Maiden.
That was a huge, huge album. Don't let anybody underestimate how important Brave New World was for Iron Maiden and for heavy metal in the year 2000, because that was a statement album.
That was heavy metal is not fucking dead.
Heavy metal is not fucking dead. Exactly.
Hey, here we are. This is what good music sounds like. Go listen to it.
The Union Avenger. You seem quite knowledgeable about metal for more than I am. How did you get your start? I got my start just with music in general, listening to just what really got me started was heavy metal, and this is the weirdest coincidence. I heard a commercial for Ozzy Osbourne's The Ozman Cometh album, and I heard some. They remember when they used to have commercials for albums. I know this is kind of dating myself a little bit, but I saw a commercial for it. I had heard some stuff on it, and I said, "Hey, Mom, can you go out and buy me this Ozzy album? This Ozman Cometh thing sounds pretty good." And I had been listening to like Tina Turner, and I'm not talking about like 70s Tina Turner. I'm talking about 80s borderline, like rock, polished 80s rock. Tina Turner, Simply the Best, that kind of stuff, and then a little bit of like Mariah Carey because I liked her high vocals and stuff like that. But all of that kind of was churning into something in me.
A metalhead liking high soaring operatic vocals, that never happens.
Imagine that, right?
You couldn't have picked a genre that was more tailor made for you if you tried.
I know. And I also discovered not most, but I also, that's how I got my start in the metal, was the Ozman Cometh album. In like 97. And then I bought two albums that were huge for me in 98. Offspring's Ixnay on the Ombre, which is an excellent album. Those early Offspring albums are really good. And Metallica's Reload, but not because Reload's a good album. Reload's a decent album. It's obviously it's not their best. But it was the album that introduced me to Metallica, because everybody was talking about Metallica at the time. I had heard some stuff. I bought it. I liked some stuff. I was a Metallica fan until I discovered that they had a career prior to 1991. You know, I went back and really loved.
I've had that same progression with so many Metallica fans that are our age, that they heard the stuff from the 90s and never really knew about the older stuff, and then somebody would play them like Master of Puppets or Kill 'Em All, and they're like, ooh, what is this? This is good Metallica.
Quick little aside, this is how it happened. I had Reload and was listening to it, and it's got catchy stuff. I like Devil's Dance. It's kind of slow, cool compositions, but not like the thrash era Metallica. And then I was at Blockbuster one day, and this is when Blockbuster was also selling CDs. And so I'm just kind of, bored. I can't find the movie I want to rent. So I'm flipping through the CD section, and I'm in the M's because I'm looking just for just through them because I'm in the metal section. I see this album. It says Metallica on it. I'm like, this can't be Metallica. It's just, the logo looks different. This guy has to be an entirely different band. And I pull up the album, and it's all blue, and it's got lightning bolts and a fucking electric chair, and it's called Ride the Lightning. I'm like, okay, out of just curiosity, I've got to buy this album, because if Metallica finds out that there's another band called Metallica out there, they're going to be a little pissed off, And I put the track on. I start playing the song, and I hear this like acoustic shit. I'm like, what the fuck? What the fuck is this shit? So
then slowly you realize you're listening to Fade to Black.
No. I'm talking about Fight Fire with Fire. But I thought that opening intro was, kind of because I was comparing it to Reload. I was thinking, okay, Reload is heavy, and I'm listening to like this opening intro, and I'm thinking to myself, what the hell? Is this the same? Is this even the same band? Were they even less heavy than they were in the past? And then 30 seconds into it, I got this. I've had punches that hit me less hard than that intro into fucking Fight Fire with Fire. I thought I was going to have a fucking heart attack. That was an amazing musical moment for me, discovering classic 80s Metallica. Thank you for letting me have that, getting my old man story time out.
No, absolutely, man. Like that, dude. Like I had a very similar journey with Metallica. I think And Justice for All was actually the first album I ever owned with my own money. And later on, I would come to find out that was actually the weakest of their original albums. And but I was only like 12, 13. I didn't know any better at the time. So I was just blown away by songs like Blackened, freaking And Justice itself, all that. And then I went back and listened to Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning and stuff like that. And it was just like, wow, there's this whole other world of Metallica out there that I had no idea about.
Those first four albums, I had to rebuy because I had them on CD, and they got so scratched up from just being, how if you lived in the late 90s, you had a portable CD player, and I would literally just listen
CDs like you wouldn't believe.
I went through. I had to rebuy every single Metallica for the first four Metallica albums at least twice, because I just scratched them up, and certain Judas Priest albums and certain Iron Maiden albums that scratched up, and I could just long car trips. I put on the headphones, throw on Master Puppets, literally throw on Master Puppets, and would be listening to it from like driving like 200 miles on a road trip that my parents took me on, and just completely content listening to this heavy music.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, I mean, it's coming back with like the NWO THM bands, which I just heard Air Raid's going to be releasing a new album this year.
I just listened to their new track, Thunderblood.
Yeah, fucking sick.
That's an awesome track.
Did you? I think I put it up on the Gilded page. That may have been where you saw it. But
no, I had seen it because I'm subbed to the new wave of traditional heavy metal.
Yeah, I'm subbed to them too. I don't get a
channel.
lot of their recommendations though, which thanks YouTube. But oh man, what a freaking band coming in! Like this is what, their third record.
I had no idea they'd even existed up until that point. I'm definitely going to buy that album when it comes out.
Oh, their first two records are kick ass as well.
Okay, then I definitely got to get into it. See, when I first saw the iconography that they used, I thought, oh man, they stole something from like Riot City or something like that, or Wolf or somebody. Nope.
I mean, Wolf's been around since like 2005.
Exactly. So,
like they're still absolutely kick ass though. Every time they come out with a new record, it's always worth a spin.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Ambush. Everything they've released since they came out with Heavy Metal High in 2014, I'm just like, yep.
Yeah.
Like instant buy. Don't even need to hear it.
Yeah. Pre-order. Let's go.
Day one purchase. Let's fucking do this thing.
I'm hounding them on their Instagram page to please put Barbarous, the singles, on a CD so I can actually have CD quality, a CD, because I like listening on CDs. I hate this digital shit, because if you're driving and you're listening to it through YouTube or something like that on your phone, your internet could cut out. You're not always going to get the highest quality audio. I like a 1-to-1. There's no bullshit, bandwidth thing preventing me from listening to the full fidelity of the music.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I always like having the physical media if I can get it.
Yeah, same.
Which caused me no end of heartache in the move because I had to find someplace to put all of it.
And those CDs weigh a lot when you finally fucking stack them in a box.
Well, it's like books where it's like, oh, how much could that weigh until you put them in a box? And then you realize how much a box full of CDs can weigh.
Life hack on moving CDs and books. Use small boxes.
Lots and lots
Never
of small
put
boxes.
all of them in one big box. Big bad mistake. I don't care if you need like 10 boxes. Small boxes. Trust me. Trust us, guys. Trust us.
You will thank it, or your back specifically will thank us later. But no, man, like that, like, and all this resurgence of like the traditional heavy metal styles and stuff like that is, you want to point like the younger kids who are just getting into this genre with bands like this back to bands like Rainbow. Like, here's where your music came from. Like, there's a whole other world of the old stuff to listen to as well. Because, a lot of people, were like us as kids, where they just listen to the stuff that they had as kids and then go forward. And they never look back at bands like, Rainbow, Black Sabbath, Judas Priest. So you're missing like a whole era of music that was absolutely formative.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there would be no Ambush without Rainbow. There would be no Wolf without Judas Priest.
Yeah.
Or even bands like Primal Fear.
Yeah.
The connection between Primal Fear and Judas Priest is obvious. As soon as you hear a Primal Fear track, you're like, yeah, these guys listen to some Priest growing up.
Yeah. That's why I love them. And
yeah,
it's not, they're not like, alone either. They're great songwriters.
You have bands like Sabaton that have straight up covered Priest tunes and have borrowed, shall we say, some of their riffs for other songs.
I'll leave that up to you. You're more of the Sabaton expert than I am. I haven't listened to enough of them. I own a couple of them and I've seen them live. They are a wonderful live band.
Oh, they're
Johan,
brilliant live. I've seen them live like 4 times. I will watch. I
so
will go
funny.
see them every time they're in the area.
They are hilarious. The singer
Oh,
Johan,
he's a fucking riot.
he cracked me up laughing. He's like,
He's a lunatic.
he said something. Don't mind us. We're just like 5 fat Swedes in paramilitary gear, just playing
Yeah,
music.
right. And like I remember the first time I ever saw their show live was at Metal Fest in Worcester, in, I think 2016. And like they came out and it was like the most Swedish intro I've ever heard. It was just like, "Good evening, we are Sabaton. We are from Sweden. We play heavy metal. Would you like to hear it?" It was like the fucking the most like innocent intro ever, and then they just smash right into Ghost Division.
I first heard Sabaton on Ice Earth's Plays of Babylon tour, which I saw in San Francisco, which was amazing. I think they opened, if I'm not confused, they opened for Ice Earth, and then I saw them open again. They opened for Nightwish in 2015 when they toured San Francisco, and yeah, they are an amazing band.
And one of the opening acts I've seen with them twice now. They were just part of the same tour at Metal Fest, but the second or the third time I went to see Sabaton live, they actually had them opening for them directly. It was Hammerfall.
Oh, cool.
Which, if you guys have never heard Hammerfall, you want some kick-ass sword and sorcery power metal, there you go.
Yeah.
You'll be on them for a while. Because
I
they've
got
been
away.
Early 90s?
Yeah, well, at least the mid 90s.
And, Iced Earth, same thing.
Ice Earth has been around since the late 80s.
Yeah. I thought their first album was 91.
Their first album was 90.
90? Okay.
90. The second album that really got them going, Night of the Storm Rider, that was 92.
Okay. But, it's like, unfortunately, when you look at a band like coming out in that period, like that was the exact time, especially in the US, where nobody was ever going to pay attention to your music.
It must have been heartbreaking for a lot of, just so deflating, because you're honing your craft for so long, for so many years. You're working your way up. You're trying to get a record deal. You're trying to do this, and then the record industry just says, enough of this, new wave, and just kind of throws everything out.
And it especially sucks when you're a band that already does that kind of music and you're kind of found your niche and you really want to get into it, and then the rug gets pulled out from under you at the last minute.
Yeah.
And Union, I was talking the band Hammerfall, which amazing, I think Norwegian power metal band. Which Scandinavian metal bands come in two flavors. They're either more on like the speed and power metal side of the house, or they're black and death metal, and there's really
nothing,
no middle ground there.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing, Soul Assassin, is that the indie scene is outpacing the established metal or record industry can ever hope to keep up with. I mean, like the YouTube and like Bandcamp age has just taken over, which to my mind is great because it means the record labels no longer have the influence that they used to on the direction of the genre going forward.
Mm-hmm. It's a double-edged.
I mean, it used to be back in the day, if the record label didn't like you, you were a nobody and you were never going anywhere, even if you were the best band on the planet.
Right.
Whereas now, if you're that good, people will notice.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll filter out through YouTube and guys like us sharing it out on Guilded and Discord and stuff like that, showing it to our friends. And you will eventually get out there. I mean, Ambush has kind of become that in a lot of ways.
The new wave of traditional heavy metal itself is a result of the YouTube generation. Just getting itself out and really kind of, kids around the world just kind of, hearing just a lot of modern metal and just, they're seeing Iron Maiden and Judas Priest begin to, age out a little. I don't know if that's the right term. It's just kind of age out, and there's like nothing to replace that with. And
or so we thought in the mid 2000s that these bands were going to age out.
right, or so we thought. And you have bands now coming up that were totally influenced by Priest and just went back and said, well, why try to reinvent the wheel? Let's just write songs in standard tuning.
And they're
The
coming
high
back to
operatic
metal as
vocals.
its golden age, in its golden age.
Just write metal as it was in its golden age. There's very little difference between the new wave of British heavy metal and the new wave of traditional heavy metal, to be honest.
Very little difference. In fact, there's bands that you could not really readily identify as being different from some of the old bands.
Exactly.
Like, I mean, let's face it, half of the stuff Ambush comes out with sounds like it straight out of 1985.
Yeah.
Riot City's first record, you could not be more Judas Priest if it tried.
Right.
I mean, like, they are just really just lightning focused on that same musical inspiration that led to the proliferation of heavy metal as a genre in the first place.
Exactly.
Like, these are bands that get why this music was popular and why people loved it, and
why it's
brought that back to the height of its power.
It's new wave of British metal. It's like Priest fans, Accept fans, Iron Maiden fans, kind of getting together as musicians, making original music with the same approach that those bands made their songs with back in their heyday.
Yeah, and I think that comes from too, like, you know, obviously tastes shift over time. You know, people's musical tastes change as the years go by, whatever. But there are certain things that don't, and you can tell that metal's time had not come naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was not killed off because, you know, no one liked it anymore, or no one was listening to it, or the fans had all given up on it. Like, it was killed by the record labels.
Mm-hmm.
And the big promoters, and you saw that because as soon as, you know, they lost their influence over the scene, the traditional heavy metal acts came roaring back to life as soon as the boot was off their neck.
Exactly. And you kind of saw that with how new metal kind of sort of, you notice how some of the new metal bands kind of remove the shards of the new in new metal. I'm looking at you, Machine Head. I'm pointing at you specifically.
And you want to talk a band that was really good, and then politics got in the way.
Talk about, oh my God.
Now, don't get me twisted. Machine Head was always political, but they started going like extremely left wing with it, rather than being mostly anti-religious and things like that. And obviously, they were going to be far left coming out of the Bay Area. That's just how that area is. But they used to be able to separate that from their music and create some really kick-ass tunes like Davidian or Locust. And, you know, they really had some talent. And unfortunately, Rob Flynn is such a lefty douchebag that they can't keep that out of their music anymore. Like, I listened to one of their newer records a few years ago, and it was just Trump Derangement Syndrome, the metal album.
Oh, that 2019 album?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the most embarrassing albums.
It really is. Like, when you listen to the lyrics, it literally is just Orange Man Bad, the record. And it's just like, oh my God, like, it's so bad I almost feel sorry for him. Like, he just can't get out of his own way and create music that doesn't revolve around this man.
I think in the comment section of one of those music videos for one of the songs he had from those albums, I think I wrote, "You're a meme at this point, Rob," or something like that.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're the crying soy jack of metal.
Pretty much. Like, just like, we get it. You don't like the man. Move on.
We get it.
And like, that's the thing, is if he'd done like a song that, like, you know, lambasted Trump or whatever, as long as it was good, I wouldn't have cared. And then just move on and do something else. But like, he just kept freaking harping on it. And like, it was just, that 2019 album was just a fucking dumpster fire. Pretty much, picture if you like let Twitter write a metal album circa 2020, that was right about what that album was. Oh man. Yeah, Ministry, unfortunately, lately too.
Yep, Al Jorgensen, big. I don't know about Lefty, but you could kind of tell that that was him politically, because The Last Sucker was a shot at George W. Bush. Now, I hate George W. Bush with a passion, but I'm just saying.
I think that's what the lefty musicians never really got. That like, no, most conservatives hate that man too.
Yeah, exactly.
we can unite in our hatred of George W. And I served under the man. I enlisted in 2008, so I was around for the tail end of his presidency. And got stuck with some of his lovelier policy decisions.
Yeah.
Such as the Afghan war. But no, I mean, like that. I mean, politics is something that metal specifically has never shied away from. Like, I mean, when you look at it, some of the finest of the early metal years, songs like War Pigs and stuff like that, it was blatantly anti-Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
But they did it in a way that resonated with people, whereas...
And they never once mentioned anything specific Vietnam related in the lyrics.
And they didn't...
It could apply to any war.
They didn't bring up parties and stuff like that.
Exactly.
This is fucked up.
See, people like Geezer, people like... I'll just say, people like Geezer, for example, they can write lyrics about politics and things going on in the world that can be applied to any time and be relatable. But when you are so focused on one particular party or individual at a given time, that music is going to either be crap or so dated it's going to be cringe for anybody listening to it in the future.
Well, that's the thing, is when you make songs about a specific event or about specific times directly, then it's only going to be relevant as long as that event is relevant.
Yes.
Whereas, like, a lot of the songs, Union just brought it up, and it's a shame Christian's not here to talk about it because that's his favorite band. CCR doing songs like "Fortunate Son" and stuff. It's something that resonates throughout the eras.
Mm-hmm.
In that, especially some of the anti-war stuff from Vietnam, like they could have been talking about any war that has ever been fought.
Exactly.
Pretty much. Whereas when you try, start tying things directly to Vietnam outside of a historical context, well, once that war's over, people, like you say, Soul Assassin, you age your music by, putting a specific political view on it. And that's something that most metal bands, at least successful ones, have shied away from, is, going after specific things. It's like you can point it out, like, another Black Sabbath tune from the same record, Hand of Doom, about the heroin epidemic that was coming out of the Vietnam War. Because a lot of guys coming back from Vietnam, well, they got treated with morphine because they were wounded. And they were never weaned off of it properly because the government didn't understand yet just how addictive opiates were. And as a result, there was a lot of veterans out there that ended up with a heroin habit.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. And a lot of, and heroin was cheap to get. It was coming over from Southeast Asia, really. In fact, some guys in the military were smuggling it back as a way of making extra money.
Wow.
And really later on, they go into it in the movie Goodfellas. Like, they're literally shipping home heroin and marijuana in the caskets of dead soldiers from Vietnam. Which, that was freaking embarrassing. But, They have, but like I said, they didn't tie Hand of Doom directly to that specific thing. It was more about, the destructive effects of that drug in general.
Metallica does the same thing too. That Black Sabbath does in those situations. Master of Puppets.
Oh yeah.
And in the same record, not just the title track, Disposable Heroes.
Yeah, Disposable Heroes, another great track by them. Or
Anti-war, but it's not political.
yeah, or one off of Injustice for All.
Yeah.
Although that one is straight up their interpretation of Johnny Got His Gun, which is a great novel, and you should all go read it. I would put it right up there with All Quiet on the Western Front as one of the most descriptive books about World War I and the horrors that war inflicted on people that that has ever been released. Sentinel, I don't know if you had to read it in school. I know I did.
I didn't read Johnny. Johnny Got His Gun, or is that what it's called? Johnny Got His Gun.
Yeah, Johnny Got His Gun.
I didn't read that. I did read. Well, I pretended. I read the cliff notes for All Quiet on the Western Front.
Which the funny part is, like, people who like got like the Cliff Notes version of All Quiet on the Western Front, like, you might as well have just gone and read the book because it's only like 220 something pages. It's not a long book. Yeah, and one of the best examples of that in the modern era, I would say, is Sabaton.
Mm-hmm.
In that they talk about the war without getting political. They don't get into who was right and who was wrong and who the bad guys were. They talk about the war as it happened and talk about the guys who were fighting it. And as a way of understanding war. Because, wars may start for political reasons, but they become their own thing.
And they're fought by people, not by the people who start them.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that's very, very hard for civilians to understand, is that, outside of the actual battle itself, there's not much in the way of malice between soldiers. It's you're over there fighting for your country, I'm over here fighting for mine. It's just business. There's no personal animosity there, and that's why you used to see, scenes like the Christmas truce from 1914 of just two sides just agreeing to put their guns down for a day,
mm-hmm.
and just coexist for that one day that they both shared. And it doesn't happen often in warfare, but when it does, it's usually a really beautiful moment like that.
Because they don't. I can only imagine the region. Not the region. I can only imagine the reason that could even have possibly happened is because nobody wanted to be there for that reason and just said, let's just have a day.
Well, I mean, it was really more of a common cultural connection because both sides were Christian, so they both decided, hey, it's Christmas. Let's
cool.
It's like we can go back to it tomorrow.
Cool. Okay.
Like the war will be there tomorrow, but just for today, we're all brothers and we're all friends.
And we're all celebrating the birth of Christ.
Yeah, we're all celebrating Christmas together.
Yeah.
And there's a reason it only happened in 1914 that was severely punished by both sides because, they figured both armies would lose the will to fight if they started seeing, themselves as the other side as their friends, which they're right. But that war was a very interesting one. And you'd also see, examples of it during like the American Civil War, where both sides were Americans. In some cases, you had guys with literal family on the other side of the battle line.
Can you imagine just...
not even just the lower soldiers either. You had, most of the senior officers involved in that war had fought together in Mexico or had gone to West Point together. Like they were friends. They knew each other very personally.
The Iced Earth, part of the Iced Earth trilogy, Hold It All, not the Iced Earth, part of the Gettysburg trilogy written by Iced Earth, Hold It All Costs. The opening is a discussion between a Union soldier and a Confederate, two friends who had been put on opposing sides by the Civil War, having a discussion of just, one person saying to the other person, "If I ever draw my sword on you, may the good Lord strike me dead. If I
Yep.
ever see you in battle, I hope I never have to. I hope I never have to. May God strike me dead before that happens."
And
Imagine
the
what a
worst
horrible
thing for
war.
for those two was that the last thing Louis Armistead ever knew, because he was wounded in the battle and then unfortunately ended up dying, was that his friend that he was talking to, General Hancock, had been shot.
Oh,
So I believe his last words were, "Not both of us."
wow.
So he died. He died thinking that his friend was about to join him and that neither one was going to survive the war.
Yeah.
And that, and these were guys who were on opposing sides, and not even just as soldiers, but as generals, like the guys commanding the armies.
And they were best friends.
Like they were on a first name basis with each other's wives. Like they had been like best friends before the war,
Yeah.
and had they both survived, probably would have been again right after.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that was how warfare was seen back then. It was, well, that's done now. Now we can be friends again. And there was some of that after World War II in Europe as well. Of once the war was over, it's like, okay, we can be friends again.
It's almost immediately. Could you say that if you were living in Europe post World War II and the war had just ended, all right, everybody, we can be friends again, but fuck Russia.
Pretty much of just like,
I thought so. Yeah.
like, okay, we're done punching each other. Now let's go watch for those assholes.
Yeah. Watch out for them.
And like, well, because there was no real cultural animosity between Germany and England and America.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there was with the French, because first of all, it's France,
Mm-hmm.
and second of all, they had been at war repeatedly with Germany and the rest of us.
Yes.
But there was a common cause there in that none of us liked the Soviet Union.
Right.
So it's like, okay, that war's done. I see this one forming. Let's go try to head that one off before we really get in trouble.
Right.
It must have been a really weird period in like the 1950s being in Germany as well, because you knew that because this is before the era of ICBMs and stuff like that, any nuclear exchange was going to be happening in your territory. Because neither side had missiles that were long enough range to reach the other country directly, but they could fight over Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So it would just be like, so you had to be like, imagine being the Germans in the middle, just going, please no, we just rebuilt this, please not again.
Yes.
It's like, and your hopes for a peaceful and prosperous future were resting on whichever one of those countries was least stable. But no, man, and that led a lot into the rock and roll movement and the hippie movement in the 60s and on into the heavy metal scene in the 70s. Was that era, like that feeling almost of impending doom
Mm-hmm.
that was over the entire world at that point, because for the first time in human history we had it in our fingertips that we could wipe out the human species in an afternoon if shit went wrong, and thank God it never did.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an unparalleled time in human history where the kids who were listening to rock and roll and then would go on to play heavy metal as young adults can remember growing up during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we were one bad day away from ending the world. And I think that fit especially Black Sabbath, but also maybe going into things like Rainbow with their more hopeful message and stuff like that. Like, hey, we need something to kind of lift us up and give us hope, rather than living in that constant state of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I grew up in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War, being born in the late 80s and then growing up in the 90s.
As did I.
When, we can remember, like, I can barely remember, like, the very tail end of the Cold War. Like, I remember the wall coming down in 89 and stuff like that, and it being a big deal, but I wasn't old enough to understand any of it.
I don't even remember that.
Like, I remember my parents being really excited about it, and that was about it. But I would have been like 2. And so I'll like remember bits and pieces here and there. Like the earliest event, like, world event I can really remember was the Gulf War in 91. Because it was on TV all the time.
Right.
Like that was, I think, the first war we got to see happen in real time.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Because, like, like even in Vietnam, like you'd see clips and stuff like that on TV at the end of the day or whatever, but it wasn't like you weren't watching CNN and watching bombs fall in real time.
Yeah, live broadcast.
And that war on a global scale or on a strategic scale was just amazing in that we completely annihilated the world's 4th largest army in 72 hours. We just literally just took them apart. And, I think partially that led into, that post-Soviet era was just this really weird time, both politically and musically and stuff like that, where, for 50 years, we've been working towards the end of this Cold War and, the fall of communism and stuff like that. And, people were making songs about it. People were writing policies based around it. And then we got it in the late 80s. And we're just sitting there going, okay, we win. Now what?
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing with human beings that we need something to strive for. We need something to work towards or an enemy to work against. And without that driving force, you see what's going on in the world now where shit just kind of goes all sorts of crazy ways.
Mm-hmm.
And, at least back then, or at least back in the day, we had things like common cultural things like music and stuff like that to latch onto as like a common identity. And nowadays, it seems like only the metalheads really have that. And that makes our genre of music pretty special in that, like, we may disagree on every other thing under the sun, but we both agree on fucking music and or metal specifically. And that's something freaking that we can have in common.
Mm-hmm.
Or used to be able to anyway.
Yeah, not lately. At least not the last 10 years I've noticed.
Which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because, like, I know we're both of the attitude of just like, politics, freaking, world events, stuff like that. We go to, metal shows and play video games and hobbies and stuff like that to get away from all that and just, leave that at the door and go have fun for a while.
Yeah. I mean, thank God I've never been in a band where I had to have a certain view, or I had to always walk on eggshells around the subject of politics.
I'll tell you what, I wouldn't have been in that band for long because I'm a lot like John Shaver with that, where if you ask me what I think, I'm going to tell you, and you might not like it.
Right.
But that's not my problem.
I would love to be in Iced Earth. The only issue I would have would be not being able to live up to John's expectations of me.
That's a hard bar to set because he's like Richie. He's like Richie Blackmore, bringing it back to Rainbow, where he has an exact. You're gone.
Yeah, because when he's on a mission, when he's on a quest, he has a vision.
If you don't get it, see you later.
See you later.
And and unfortunately, I think that's what has caused the turnover in a lot of these bands is you have at least one artist and maybe multiple that have that vision. And then if you're one of those artists or one of those musicians who's just kind of along for the ride and doing your own thing, it's not really going to last long. Because the personalities are going to clash, or especially if you have multiple creative influences in a band, if they're not a cohesive unit like Judas Priest or Saxon, where like, there's a central vision for the band that they all agree on,
Right.
then you're going to get what happened to Rainbow with, band members constantly leaving and coming, and the sound kind of changing as a result of that. And I think that may be why they're not as well known as other metal bands from this period,
That's
which is a
good point,
shame. I think, because
because
they've got a
Rainbow
ton
and the I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, man.
I was just going to say, I didn't know of Rainbow. Well, at least this version of it. Like, I had heard Since You've Been Gone before I had heard any other Rainbow song, but I didn't associate that Rainbow with Dio's Rainbow until I knew that they were both the same band. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, they sound completely different.
They were so different. At least those two songs. And Since You've Been Gone was such a super radio hit in America. When Lifetime makes an album volume of hard rock hits, and they include Since You've Been Gone, you're not going to assume that Dio era Rainbow is the same band that song came from.
Then that super commercial track, and that's not me shitting on it. Like
Neither.
like,
Yeah.
it's a great track, and a lot of the later Rainbow stuff is really good too. But to me, if you're going to listen to an era of Rainbow, this is where you start.
That's where you start, and that's probably where you could live if you wanted to live in any particular era.
Yeah, like if you want to just pretend that Rainbow stopped existing after Ronnie left the band, I could totally see why you'd do that.
Yes.
But like this is, I think for every metalhead, this is a band you would at least need to give a listen to these first 3 records and see where you go from there, because these guys are so formative to the entire genre and everything that came later, that you'll really get a lot of later stuff and where it came from just listening to this. And with that, I think we're going to call that an episode, because we could go on about these guys forever. Their impact, their influence on the genre, them musically, but I think we've hit all the major points and extolled the virtues of Ronnie James Dio and Richie Blackmore.
Yes.
And again, I really hope you guys go listen to these guys, because they're really just one of those bands that's truly special. And Soul Assassin, I might actually do that at some point. It won't be on YouTube though. It would be on Rumble, if anything. And I am planning on doing more content on Rumble going forward, especially gaming streams and stuff like that. This week I am going to be doing Hogwarts Legacy over there on release day, because they told us we shouldn't stream it or we're transphobic or whatever. So I'm going to do it, and they can eat a dick, because what's the fastest way to get a metalhead to do something? Tell us not to do it.
Yep.
Or tell us we can't do it. Like, okay, watch me. But no, Sentinel, what do you got going on this week, man?
I'm hella busy, so I'm not going to be doing much lately. My goal is to get another music video up on my channel that I've edited together. I've had such bad writer's block on that for a while, but that's a goal of mine. You can find me on my YouTube channel, The Sentinel. You can find me on Instagram at The Sentinel41, and you can currently find me for a little bit on Twitter at The Sentinel831 on Twitter.
Excellent.
And I also have a Rumble channel, The Sentinel1.
That's right. Rumble. Yes. We are both on Rumble, and I really do want to start promoting the Rumble side of things, because YouTube's not getting any better.
No, it's not.
They're not going to get any less censorious or any more douchey to their creators. So I really think that Rumble's the way forward. So I really do want to start putting more content on that side of the house.
Did you know that you can actually use StreamYard to live stream to YouTube and Rumble simultaneously?
I did. I'll have to play around with the settings and try to figure out how to do that, because I'm gonna do some streaming over there this week with just doing gaming stuff on OBS, and then we'll see how that goes, and then I'll probably end up eventually live streaming on both Rumble and YouTube simultaneously. As it is, you can watch the video over on Rumble the next day.
Yeah.
And I treated it mostly as a backup. Union, I believe his YouTube link is in the description of the video. If not, I will put it up after we are done here. I'll check that. But no, thanks for coming on, man. It's always good having you.
Oh, no problem, man. It's always great to talk about heavy metal in general. And listen to these albums. Listen to the later albums. But definitely, or at the very least, do what I initially did and just buy a compilation of Rainbow material. Let me look up. I think it's the Rainbow Anthology. Let me just watch the Rainbow, the Anthology compilation album by Rainbow. Get that album. That is a great introduction to all eras of Rainbow.
Absolutely, man. And like, I think that's like a way to get into the genre. Like, you get a compilation of everything and then go find the albums that the stuff you really like is on.
Yeah.
And you almost can't go wrong with this band. I don't know that they have any albums I would consider outright bad. And when it comes to this era, everything's all fucking
right,
kick-ass. And as for next week's band, Soul Assassin, I think we are going to do the early period of Blind Guardian. So,
I have no Blind Guardian stuff. I got to get on that then.
Yeah, I think we'll do the first few records from Blind Guardian, getting into the real power metal side of the house.
Okay, so the first few Blind Guardian albums. Okay.
Yeah, and then we'll see how that goes. And I think maybe after that we'll be doing some Rush, because it's beyond time that we talked about them.
Okay, sounds good.
But hopefully you guys will all join us for that. And until then, take care, stay safe. I love you all, and I'll catch you next time.